Hello there, and welcome to Dream Myths. My voice is your guide tonight as we journey into a collection of 3 fantasy tales. But first, let us prepare for the path ahead. Find a position where you can truly rest, allowing your body to settle into the embrace of comfort. Take a deep, slow breath in through your nose, a breath that fills you with the stillness of the evening air. As you breathe out, feel the day's activities, its worries and its hurried moments begin to dissipate like mist clearing from a tranquil valley. Now, from the very tips of your toes, imagine a gentle, golden light, a wave of profound calm beginning its slow ascent. Feel it as it moves upward through your feet, your ankles, your calves, and your thighs. Allow this peaceful warmth to flow into your hips, up your back, into your chest, and down your arms. Let it soothe every muscle in your neck, and finally into your head, washing away every last thought. As your breathing becomes a steady, rhythmic cadence and your mind finds a quiet stillness, prepare to join me in a story of courage, unexpected wisdom, and a friendship that will defy all expectations. Sir Gareth stood at attention in the great hall of Castle Whitstone, the stone cold beneath his feet, the silence a heavy shroud over the court. The source of this profound quiet was a distraught King Edmund, whose face was a mask of sorrow and grim determination. He had summoned Gareth, not for celebration, but for a mission of gravest importance. For 3 moons, the king's son, Prince Rowan, had been missing, his disappearance a gaping wound in the heart of the kingdom. The king recounted the tale of the royal hunting party, an event meant for sport that had ended in a brutal ambush, leaving many of his finest men dead. Scouts sent to the site of the attack found 2 pieces of evidence that shattered all hope: a child's silver pendant, blackened and scorched, and an enormous, humming copper dragon scale. To King Edmund, the meaning was clear. The last dragon of Alberon, a creature thought to be nothing more than a legend, had returned to claim his son. The king then looked at Sir Gareth, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. He tasked the knight with a dual and seemingly impossible mission: find the prince and then slay the dragon. In exchange, he promised Gareth lands and a noble title, a reward befitting the hero of the kingdom. But Gareth, a man known for his unwavering honor rather than a thirst for battle, felt the weight of the court's unspoken judgment. He could sense their whispers, their cold glances, a collective belief that he was being sent on a suicide mission, a death sentence, cloaked in the guise of a rescue. They saw the dragon as a monster, a force of destruction, and his mission as a fool's errand, not a heroic quest. He was a knight, alone, armed with a king's grief and a kingdom's skepticism. 5 days of relentless travel had taken their toll on Sir Gareth, but the sheer cliffs of the Black Fang Mountains stood as an unyielding testament to his resolve. He rode into a world of stone and shadow, a perilous landscape where the journey itself was a trial of endurance. The path was not a road, but a series of treacherous, narrow ledges, each one a breath away from a fatal plunge into the abyss. The air was thin, and the cutting winds howled like a living creature, a constant menace that threatened to tear him from his saddle. Sudden snowfalls, thick and blinding, swept down from the peaks, turning the perilous ascent into a white-knuckle crawl against the elements. As he moved deeper into the mountains, the signs of his quarry became disturbingly clear. He found giant claw marks scored into the granite face of a cliff, as if the rock itself were mere clay. A short distance away, the burnt remains of a mountain goat, charred black, served as a grim monument to the dragon's appetite. But it was the discovery of a knight's dagger, its silver pommel bearing the royal crest of King Edmund, that sent a cold wave of dread through him. It was a silent testament to the fate of those who had come before, a symbol of hope extinguished. At last, he discovered the cave's entrance. It was a yawning chasm in the side of the mountain, its maw wide and smoke-blackened, exhaling an acrid odor of sulfur and ozone that stung his eyes and throat. With a drawn sword in one hand and a lone, flickering torch in the other, he entered the cavernous mouth. The cold within was not a normal cold, but a deeper, more ancient chill that seemed to seep into his very bones, a cold that felt alive and watchful. And as the wind howled around the peaks above, it seemed to carry a haunting sound, a whispering echo of the prince's name, a final, eerie beckoning into the darkness. Gareth emerged from the narrow passage into a cavern of staggering proportions. The air, once cold and stale, was now filled with a shimmering warmth and the smell of ancient dust. He stood on a precipice overlooking a vast, circular chamber, its floor a sea of glittering gold, ancient artifacts, and precious stones. Coiled upon this magnificent mound of treasure was the very creature of legend, the last dragon of Alberon, Its scales were a mosaic of burnished copper, catching the light from his torch and casting 1,000 dancing reflections across the cave walls. The beast stirred, uncoiling a neck of immense length, and with a roar that shook the very ground, it unleashed a torrent of fire, a river of destructive power that consumed the space between them. Gareth, a knight of courage and quick wit, instinctively dove behind a massive fallen boulder, using the cavern's own stone as a shield against the inferno. The battle was a brief but fierce dance between man and beast, with Gareth, a desperate blur of motion against the dragon's immense power. But just as the dragon coiled to strike a final, decisive blow, a small figure darted from behind its front leg, his voice ringing out with a surprising authority. "Stop! Please, stop!" he cried. Gareth froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The boy, no more than 7 years of age, stood between the knight and the dragon, his golden hair a beacon in the torchlight. It was Prince Rowan. He was unharmed, unafraid, and his presence was the most unbelievable sight Gareth had ever witnessed. In stunned disbelief, Gareth's sword fell from his numb hand, clattering against the rock floor. The dragon, in turn, did not move. Its massive head, once filled with fury, was now lowered, its gaze fixed on the boy, a silent testament that it seemed to listen to his every word. The most dangerous creature in the kingdom was not a monster, but a pet, and the great mystery was just beginning to unfold. With the battle halted by the command of a boy, Prince Rowan, a prince in exile, began to tell his story. He explained that the dragon, a creature he affectionately called Ember, was not his captor, but his savior. He recounted the harrowing aftermath of the ambush, how he had been lost in the merciless wilderness for days, the biting cold of the snow creeping into his bones, a slow and certain death. It was Ember, the last of her kind, who had found him, brought him back to her cave, kept him warm with her body, and fed him with the spoils of her hunt. Rowan, his young voice filled with the passion of an advocate, spoke of Ember not as a beast, but as a friend. He told Gareth that she was a gentle and solitary soul, a misunderstood creature whose actions were born not of malice, but of a deep and ancient kindness. He then made a heartbreaking confession. He was staying in the cave by choice, knowing with a child's simple certainty that if he returned to the castle, his father would have Ember killed. It was then that Rowan, with a wisdom that belied his tender years, proposed a plan. He instructed Gareth to return to the king with proof of his survival. He gave the knight his royal signet ring, a piece of evidence that could not be denied, but to ask for more time, for a reprieve from the order to slay the dragon. The plan was not to deceive, but to buy time, to slowly, carefully prepare his father, the grieving and prejudiced king, for a truth that would shatter his long-held beliefs. It was a truth that dragons were not the monsters of legend, but ancient, sacred creatures, and that the only true monster in this story was the fear and misunderstanding in the hearts of men. The great doors of castle-lit stone swung open, and Sir Gareth strode into the great hall, his armor bearing the marks of his arduous journey. A hush fell over the court, a silence of somber expectation, which was broken by the king's hopeful cry. Gareth knelt before the throne, not with a triumph, but with a simple, humbling piece of proof: Prince Rowan's royal signet ring. The king seized it, examining the crest with trembling hands, and a wave of raw, paternal relief washed over his face. He was overjoyed, his despair replaced by a desperate, renewed hope, and he granted Gareth 2 weeks to complete his mission. But Gareth, his head clear and his purpose true, refused the offer of men and a grand procession. He insisted that the delicate task ahead required caution and subtlety, a stealthy approach rather than a loud show of force. The king, though perplexed, agreed to his terms. Standing beside the throne, Sir Darion, the king's champion and a man consumed by ambition, watched the exchange. His eyes, a cold, unreadable gray, followed Gareth's every move. He saw not a hero, but a rival, and a deep-seated jealousy began to fester in his heart. As the court dispersed, Darion began to move through the halls like a shadow, spreading subtle, malicious whispers among the king's advisors. He painted a portrait of Gareth as a vainglorious fool who, blinded by the promise of glory, would risk the prince's life for his own personal gain. A new conflict, one of treachery and political intrigue, was beginning to brew in the heart of the kingdom. With a newfound sense of purpose, Sir Gareth, Prince Rowan, and the dragon, Ember, formed a quiet and extraordinary alliance. The cave, once a place of solitude, became a hub of collaboration as they worked together to gather irrefutable proof of Ember's innocence. Gareth, with Rowan's guidance, explored the deepest, most hidden parts of the cavern, a vast library of forgotten history. There, they found ancient scrolls, their brittle parchment filled with stories and intricate drawings that depicted a long-forgotten era of peace, where humans and dragons lived as allies, not enemies. This was the evidence, a truth buried by time and fear, that Gareth knew he must bring to the king. In preparation for their meeting with the king, Ember demonstrated her gentle nature to a skeptical Gareth. The massive dragon, a creature of immense power, lowered her head with a soft rumble, allowing Rowan to braid wild flowers into her shimmering copper scales. A tender and unforgettable moment that solidified the knight's faith in the boy's story. As the days of the king's reprieve dwindled, Gareth began to leave small, carefully placed packages of evidence at the outskirts of the mountain, hoping to be found by the king's scouts. He was planting seeds of doubt in King Edmund's mind, preparing the soil for the truth that would soon be revealed. But on the 10th day, just as they were preparing for their descent, a shadow fell over their plans. From his perch high on the mountain, Gareth spotted a familiar crest and a company of knights advancing toward the cave. It was Sir Darian. His approach, a clear and menacing signal of his suspicion and jealousy. Gareth knew he had to turn back, but Rowan, with a new sense of authority that seemed to emanate from his time with Ember, insisted that they stand their ground. He declared that he would speak to Darion, asserting his authority as a prince and ending this conflict without bloodshed. The moment of truth was no longer a matter of choice. It was coming for them. With a quiet, defiant resolve, Prince Rowan, with Ember by his side, stepped out of the cave entrance to confront Sir Darian and his armed party. The young prince's posture was one of unyielding authority, a presence that belied his tender years. Darion, his face a mask of cold fury, immediately began to hurl accusations. He claimed that Rowan had been bewitched by the monstrous creature, and that Sir Gareth was a treacherous accomplice, a traitor to the crown. But Rowan did not flinch. He stood his ground, a prince of flesh and blood against the steel of Darian's prejudice. And with a voice that rang with the clear tone of a true royal, he commanded them to lower their weapons. A few of the knights, men whose loyalty was to the crown itself and not to Darian's ambition, hesitated, their swords still in their scabbards, their eyes filled with doubt. Darian, enraged by this act of defiance from a child, roared his order to attack. But before a single blow could be struck, the resonant sound of a royal horn echoed through the mountains. King Edmund, followed by a much larger force, emerged from the pass, having followed Darian's trail, a suspicion having grown in his heart. Darian, ever the opportunist, turned to the king and began his rehearsed tale of betrayal and witchcraft. But the king, seeing his son standing unharmed before the dragon, a peaceful tableau that defied his every expectation, cut him short with a single powerful command to be silent. The king's arrival had shattered Darian's plot, and the truth, no longer a whisper, was about to be heard. King Edmund, despite seeing his son safe and sound, was not yet ready to abandon his long-held prejudices. Rowan and Gareth, speaking with the clear passion of truth, tried to explain the situation, presenting the ancient scrolls as irrefutable proof of Ember's peaceful nature. But the king, a man blinded by a lifetime of fear and tales of monstrous dragons, dismissed the evidence as a clever deception and, with a final unyielding order, commanded his archers to fire on the beast. But before a single arrow could be loosed, Rowan, in a moment of pure, selfless courage, threw himself in front of the dragon, shielding her with his small body. It was then, in that tense and terrifying moment, that the mountains erupted with chaos. The very same bandits who had attacked the royal hunting party, now an even larger force, ambushed the king's men from the surrounding crags. In the whirlwind of chaos that followed, an arrow meant for King Edmund flew through the air, and Ember, the dragon he had just ordered to be killed, without a moment's hesitation, placed her massive body between the king and the arrow. The battle that ensued was a brutal, swirling melee. Gareth and the king's men, caught off guard, fought bravely against the bandits. But it was Ember, despite the arrow lodged deep in her side, who turned the tide. With a roar of defiance, she fought off the attackers with a renewed ferocity, her fiery breath and massive, sweeping tail protecting the king's party. The arrow that had pierced Ember had not just struck flesh and scale. It had, in that single selfless act, pierced the veil of prejudice in the king's heart. With the bandits defeated and scattered, silence, broken only by the groans of the wounded, fell over the battlefield. Ember, the magnificent creature who had just saved them, lay wounded on the ground, an arrow still lodged in her side. Prince Rowan, his face streaked with dirt and tears, rushed to his friend, his young voice ringing with a desperate plea for his father to help her. King Edmund, his worldview utterly shattered by the events of the day, could only stare in disbelief at the dragon he had intended to kill. He had come to the mountains to slay a monster, but the monster he had sought was the one who had just saved his life. He knelt beside Ember, his hands trembling as he reached out, not in aggression, but in a gesture of profound apology. He then turned to Sir Darian, his voice now filled with a new, quiet authority, and ordered him to ride back to the castle and bring the royal physician. With the prejudice that had long clouded his judgment finally lifted, the king listened to Rowan and Gareth's full story, accepting the evidence from the ancient scrolls as irrefutable truth. Rowan, seeing his father's change of heart, made a final, powerful request that the king establish the Black Fang Mountains as a royal sanctuary for Ember and allow him to visit her. Gareth, watching the king's transformation, added his own wisdom, suggesting that this was a chance for a new beginning, a chance for their two kinds to live in peace. 3 days later, a grand and triumphant procession descended from the mountains. King Edmund, now a king with a new purpose, led the way, with Prince Rowan, Sir Gareth, and a recovering Ember following. At the foot of the mountains, the king issued a new decree, establishing the Black Fang Mountains as a royal sanctuary, and a new order of knights, the Dragon Guard, was formed to protect it. Sir Gareth, the knight who had once been sent on a fool's errand, was named its first commander. The story concludes with a hopeful promise of a new era of peace, of the preservation of ancient knowledge, and of a king who, in his darkest hour, had found the courage to embrace a new truth.